She unpacked slowly, relishing the quiet. In the corner of the bedroom stood an old, full-length mirror. Its frame was ornate but tarnished, and the glass rippled slightly, distorting reflections. Exhausted, Mia slipped into bed. She glanced at the mirror. The longer she looked, the more she noticed something was off. The reflection didn't match her movements exactly. It was subtle, an eye blink delayed, a tilt of the head slightly too slow. She shook it off as exhaustion playing tricks on her mind and fell asleep. That night, she dreamed of whispers, growing louder until they became a chorus of angry, demanding voices. She woke in a cold sweat. She told herself it was just a nightmare. She woke in a cold sweat. She told herself it was just a nightmare. The following days were uneventful until one evening, as she brushed her hair in front of the mirror, her reflection smiled, but she didn't. Her heart raced as the reflection raised a hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass. Paralyzed with fear, Mia stumbled backward. Her reflection stepped out of the mirror. Its eyes were dark, bottomless voids, and its smile widened unnaturally. "No more hiding," it hissed. Before Mia could scream, it lunged. The last thing she saw was her own distorted, horrified face staring back at her from inside the mirror. The next day, neighbors noticed Mia acting differently. She seemed cheerful, but her smiles were unnerving, too wide. They shrugged it off as her adjusting to the new place. In her bedroom, the mirror now reflected an empty room, except for a faint outline of hands pressed against the glass, clawing to get out.
The unseen tenant. Elliot had been searching for months for an affordable apartment. When he stumbled upon the ad for a quaint, one-bedroom unit in an old building on the edge of town, the price seemed too good to be true. The apartment had a peculiar charm, despite the creaking floors and faded wallpaper. There was a strange smell, faint but metallic, that Elliot dismissed as age. On the first night, he heard the sound of soft footsteps pacing above him. Curious, he asked the landlord the next morning. "No one lives above you," the landlord said, avoiding Elliot's gaze. Elliot laughed it off, but each night, the footsteps grew louder, now accompanied by faint whispers. He noticed things moving, a chair slightly askew, his keys left in places he didn't recall. One night, as he lay in bed, the whispers turned into a voice, low and hoarse. "Why are you here?" Bolting upright, Elliot scanned the room, but it was empty. Determined to prove it was his imagination, he left a tape recorder running while he slept. The next morning, he played the tape. At first, it was silent, apart from his breathing. Then, a voice broke through, "Get out." Terrified, he searched the building for answers. In the basement, he found a locked door. Breaking it open, he discovered a small, windowless room filled with yellowing newspapers. The headlines were chilling: "Tenant missing in strange circumstances, residents flee haunted apartment." Elliot turned to leave but froze. The door had shut behind him. A cold breath tickled his neck, and a voice whispered, "You're staying with us now." The footsteps above stopped. Instead, they began pacing inside the basement.
Deep in the forest, where the trees leaned unnaturally toward one another, stood an ancient, abandoned house. No one remembered who built it, only that it had been there longer than anyone could recall. Locals whispered about its curse, that anyone who entered would vanish, their voices carried back by the wind, begging for help. Ethan was skeptical, a rational man. He dismissed the stories as superstition and ventured into the woods one overcast afternoon, determined to disprove the tales. The house loomed before him, its windows like empty eyes, its door slightly ajar as if inviting him in. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with decay. The walls were lined with strange symbols, scratched deep into the wood. A faint hum vibrated in his ears, growing louder as he stepped further in. The floor creaked beneath his weight, but when he looked down, he froze. His reflection stared back from the floorboards. Not his current self, but a gaunt, aged version, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. The hum turned into whispers. They grew louder, forming words. "Join us. You've always belonged here." Ethan turned to flee, but the door was gone. The walls shifted, elongating, pulsating like something alive. Hands emerged from the shadows, clawing at him, dragging him toward the center of the room. As he screamed, His reflection in the floor mirrored every moment, laughing with a mouth full of jagged teeth. The last thing Ethan saw before the darkness consumed him was his reflection stepping out of the floor and taking his place. When hikers passed the house days later, they heard faint laughter coming from within. Ethan's voice joined the chorus, whispering, "Welcome home,"